Pakistani military colonel at the military hospital in Peshawar who operated on her first. There is no doubt whatsoever that she was shot, but that hasn't stopped many people, including really quite senior people, including editors of newspapers in Pakistan, arguing with me on radio programs that this is all completely made up. So I think that we're in an era where, certainly I've been a journalist for 30 years, I've never known a time like this where there's such a tendency to blame the messenger. And as I said, even in countries like this with sort of what we thought were well-established democracies, free press, that we can't take these things for granted anymore. So I think that's all I can say, because it would be good to discuss these things.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for clearly identifying a lot of flaws that we have that we still need to address, and countries only progress once they identify their flaws. And then Pakistan, it definitely is a beautiful country with a lot of family values and a lot of traditions and culture, with a very robust society. But if we don't identify our flaws, we can never move ahead. Now I know a lot of you have been waiting for Cyril. So Cyril Almeida was until recently the Sunday columnist and an assistant editor at Dawn. He was with the newspaper since 2008. In April, he was named as the International Press Institute's 2019 World Press Freedom Hero. The IPI award honors journalists who have made significant contribution to the promotion of press freedom, particularly in the face of great personal risk. He is a Rhodes Scholar and received a second BA in jurisprudence from Oxford University in 2006. Earlier, he earned an undergraduate degree in economics from Lahore University of Management Sciences in 2003. So let me welcome Cyril.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. I'd also like to thank Manur and our team for organizing today's event, but a second thank you to them for getting me out of dharna-stricken Islamabad. I have happened to be unfortunate enough to have been, I'm sure, along with Talat there for all of them since 2013. It's not a lot of fun. The topic today is obviously censorship, and I've been given the unenviable task by Manur of talking about Pakistan predominantly. But I definitely would like to say a couple of things about Kashmir and about India. On Kashmir, I think a salute and a salam to the brave journalists out there who are bringing us information that we otherwise would not have had, and clearly that the Indian state would prefer that we not have. I think for people in this room who have been consuming some of that news and admiring some of that coverage, you should think about it in the context of your own country, India or Pakistan, and when you disagree with news, whether that should be supported or not. On India, I think, obviously there's a lot being talked about, but I'd like to touch on a slightly different aspect, and for me a very troubling aspect of the role the media started to play in the potential for conflict in the region. And I'll take you back to the Uri strikes in 2016 and the so-called surgical strike reaction that happened. At that time, personally, I felt that if, the Indian domestic audience or political lobby was satisfied because of some extravagant tale told to them by their government, if it avoided war between the two countries, hey, that's okay, right? Whatever it takes. But then you fast forward to Pulwama, and then you start to realize that now, because the last time you've done a surgical strike, there's a demand for something even more the second time. And then that, of course, led to Balakot and these extravagant claims yet again. And I think other than if it had not been for Abhinandan and him falling alive on the Pakistani side of the LOC, we don't know where we would be today. And I think what has happened is the media is not, the Indian government may have used the media to try and satisfy domestic political opinion at home, but that is now ending up in, because it's not a one-shot game, it's an iterative cycle, and each time it happens, the next time it happens, will the Modi government really be able to get away with something short of what it did in Balakot or it claimed to? So I think we've been caught in a very dangerous cycle in South Asia, and unfortunately the media has become both part of it and hostage to it. Moving on to, I guess, the central part of my presentation today, as asked by Manur. Censorship in Pakistan. I mean, I think I can just say this up front. Short story, the short of it is that it is not going to get any better in Pakistan. There are only two real questions as far as I'm concerned, which is how much worse will it get and how quickly it will get to being worse. And in that context, I think it's important to rewind a little bit and understand what is underpinning this censorship regime that you're seeing now being unrolled in Pakistan. I think if you look back at it, this century, the 21st century in Pakistan, the media landscape, you've really seen two earthquakes or revolutions. The first one, and that was the thing that started it all, was of course what Talat and many other anchors became, sort of spectacular beneficiaries of, which was when Musharraf allowed private media to take hold in Pakistan. And the common sort of refrain in Pakistan is, well, Musharraf was a liberal guy, and he wasn't too worried about having a media to contend with. But I think there was a logic behind what he did, and that too was rooted in India. Because if you go back to the late 1990s, early 2000s, the Indian private media had already taken off at that point. And if you look at Kargil, Operation Parakram, the attack on the Delhi Parliament, you saw that this newly risen private media in India was able to rally nationalist sentiment in a way that Doordarshan and another state channel would have not been able to. And I think what they saw this on the Pakistani side of the body was like, okay, look, they're being able to mobilize their population more effectively. And secondly, if you remember, in the mid-90s, late 90s, early 2000s, dish antennas were very popular in Pakistan. And you were getting Z News or Star News or whatever the channels were called back then. And there was concern that Indian propaganda in the form of news is being directly beamed into Pakistan. So the answer to that would be, well, if India is doing it, why don't we do it? And if you raise a new media, private media, drawn predominantly from the middle class, maybe it will start to represent that middle class kind of nationalism. And I think that it was not altruism that led Musharraf to do this. It was because in response to what they were seeing on the Indian side. This idea that we should have our own, and perhaps if we don't have our own, with the dish antennas and the penetration that the Indian media had achieved in Pakistan, it allowed sort of Indian propaganda as viewed by the Pakistani state to be disseminated in this country. And, it worked. It actually did. And it perhaps worked too well. And maybe, again, perhaps one day the book will be written on this. But I think Musharraf yes, there was this element of he felt very comfortable with the media. He would give grant interviews. He liked to spar with them. He didn't see any harm in it. But over the course of time, particularly, and we have to come to the lawyers' movement and Lal Masjid, those two incidents demonstrated the power of the media to be able to take on powerful elements within the state, including a military dictator. And institutionally, perhaps the military realized that this is an animal that has grown too big, too powerful, too quickly, and it needs to be cut down. And so, as you go through that logic, you sort of, once that institutional realization sinks in, separate to what Musharraf's own proclivities were, and once he's been sidelined, you see that there's been an attempt over a period of time to progressively deal with this new private media beast that had erupted in Pakistan. And because Musharraf was so laissez-faire in giving out licenses or allowing it, it created this whole class of new people and new business owners, media owners who were involved in the game, that there was a sense about how do we bring this to heel. And I think the story fast forwards to, of course, the attack on Hamid Mir in 2014. And then, of course, Geo's transmission for the next few hours. That was really a watershed moment. I would trace this particular round of censorship that we're seeing in Pakistan to that one event, the starting point. It was like, this beast is now taking us on. The biggest, like the 800-pound gorilla in Pakistan, the unchallenged power. And from there you've seen, sort of things accelerating. I sometimes joke with Hamid that he was Exhibit A and I'm Exhibit B of what can be done to the media in Pakistan or individual journalists. But I think perhaps what what Farzana mentioned earlier, it's important to understand that this is also interconnected to the rollback of civil liberties and personal freedoms and political rights in Pakistan. What is happening to the media is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening, what I think is perhaps the greatest rollback of civil liberties and political freedoms and media freedoms in a generation. At least certainly since I've been working. Where do we go from here? To be honest, I don't think anyone should be very optimistic. Because the media landscape is so fragmented, the ownership is so fragmented, everyone's at each other's throats, whether it's anchors, media houses, journalists. Of course, in that environment, when you have a powerful entity, which is both determined to and sees you as perhaps the threat or the enemy to national cohesion or whatever the state narrative that wants to be out there, I think, just have to revert to my original point that the two questions in my mind really are how much worse is it going to get and how quickly we'll get there. And on that somewhat downcast note, I'd like to move on to question and answers, please.
Thank you. I know everybody has a lot of questions, so I'm going to open the house to question and answers. Show of hands.
My name is Rashid Hashmi. I'm a social media activist here. My question to anyone, please. Actually, I came here, I was quite depressed because I was one of those people who was circled in that the press conference as a traitor, and my name was there as a traitor. I don't know what I did wrong, but I was quite happy when Christina mentioned like loads of people being killed. So I'm happy like I'm still alive and I'm sitting here. Going to my question, we're talking about the censorship in Pakistan. I think we are such a polarized society in terms of everything, especially when it comes to the media things. I stopped watching, TV programs since Talat's programs have been out of tele because I can watch on my mobile phone on his YouTube channel now. Yeah. So while we are sitting here talking about the censorship in media, there are loads of people who are on the other side of the channels who might be laughing at us like there's no censorship, media is open and they are talking everything. I know they are doing a lot of propaganda on TV and nobody stops them. And on the other side, if a Saagdas comes on the television, there's a mute button and then camera says that you can't come over the TV. Yeah? So I think there is a balanced situation, which my question is like, what is the balance which should be there, like, when it comes to the media, because on the other hand, there's lots of propaganda going on, and all, lies are being sold, and in the other, this side, we can't say anything. So question is, do you think in near future, because Cyril said it's not happening in near future, but Talat, do you think it's going to be any better in near future in Pakistan?
Thank you, sir.
Just a point on censorship in Pakistan. I think an important chapter in censorship that we often overlook, and I don't want to dwell on the reasons for that, that even during the robust days of Musharraf's laissez-faire policy on media, there were some really dark chapters of censorship in Pakistan. The current model in place was tried, tested, perfected by the MKM. And I always wonder why we continue to eliminate that chapter from our history. That's when journalists were eliminated. That's when the mute buttons were invented. That's when people were harassed. That's when the Karachi-based newspapers, journalists, and media owners were put under the heel. That's where Karachi was the lab where modern repressive censorship methods were invented, implemented, and most of the liberal media, unfortunately, chose to ignore that. But I think when you look at the history of Pakistan's censorship, you need to really plug that chapter in to understand that even in the best of times, we had some of the worst of times. So that actually contextualizes my answer to your question. The answer is that it's an uphill struggle. These are very tough times. and these are not specific to Pakistan only. You mentioned what's happening in the US. You have the president of the US openly talking about fake news and challenging facts which are in your face, and then how do you respond to that when somebody is in deliberate denial of facts? So there's a global trend. There's a lot of populism that is associated with censorship. People do not believe, they have low trust levels. But I guess at the same time, you have platforms available, this being one of them. There are many others coming up through which truth can be spoken to authority, and people have a tendency to still sift fact from fiction. I do not totally believe that polarization exists along black and white lines. Even those who are doing the propaganda understand that they are doing the propaganda, and the public at large has the capacity. They may not be able to get to the real fact, but they have a good sense of the fact. And as long as that sense of the fact remains, as a journalist, frankly, I believe that there is a receptive market out there that I want to reach out to. So I would not be so, hopeless. The room looks sort of filled with hopelessness. But it's an uphill struggle. It's a global problem specific to Pakistan. There are challenges out there. But we have been through worse. I think most of us need to remind ourselves what it was like to be operating out of Karachi and dealing with the MCAM. I think that will tell you the story of what a real censorship is.
Thank you.
Hi. It was this gentleman at the back.
Hi, Temur Iqbal, member Chatham House. Question to Cyril sir, you and Cyril, and all of them actually. If Modi Nawaz initiative had not been sabotaged and they had continued their engagement, and hypothetically speaking, if Mia Saab had won the 2018 election, do you still think BJP would have gone for the Article 370 booking?
Well, I don't know what Modi was thinking, but I'm inclined to agree with Talat on his earlier analysis that obviously he flew to to Lahore on the way back from Afghanistan, famously in 2013, Christmas Day, his birthday, and then a week later, of course, Pathankot happened. And there's always been the case, perhaps in 2008, when Asad Zardari had been newly sworn in as president. A little while after that, he made some comments about no first strike. Then a little bit after that, Mumbai happened. And I think that's a well-known pattern. Correlation may not be causation, but it doesn't look like Modi was trying to do much different to what we're seeing right now. I think he was biding his time, and it seems fairly obvious that this is not just about Kashmir. You're seeing what I'm consuming, the news from India. You're seeing this in different parts of the country, and you're seeing what is a right-wing Hindu government trying to establish a long-term rule over India, right, as the Congress and the opposition is in trouble. So while yes, there are obviously very acute questions to be asked of the Kashmir issue and the Kashmir dispute specifically, I think what we're seeing is a larger unfolding of a larger agenda where Kashmir is one aspect of it, and I don't know if that would have changed had there been another interlocutor on the Pakistani side. Thank you.
I would endorse that.
Can you have your question, please?
Yeah, I'm Amber Ferry, and I just wanted to ask 2 points actually. One is that what Dr. Farzana Shaikh said in her presentation was about the possibility of the blasphemy charge being used to silence dissent and victimize people. But I was just wondering, especially in light of Cyril's recent experiences, whether we would not see so much blasphemy being used as a tool, but rather treason. I mean, this whole sort of hyper-nationalistic atmosphere, whether
Just
that was going
one quick comment, don't rule out the blasphemy thing either.
there.
I won't say anything more
That's
than
always
that.
there. This is
No,
this,
my personal experience, but sure, please.
yeah. But in the present circumstances, is this not a very
I just want to say it was not necessarily just a hypothetical, so,
no, not a hypothetical. It's always there. But are we going to see the sort of treason charges come at par almost? Like, are they going to be as effective? Okay, Ghaddari, anti-nationalist. That was one thing, just food for thought. And the other thing was about Cyril's highly pessimistic, in such a situation where you said, what was it? It's just a question of when and how bad. Yeah. So just want to.
Sure,
Yes,
no,
sir.
absolutely.
No, you go ahead.
You know, I mean, obviously, and Talat might be much better positioned to answer this one, but the different types of media, mainstream media, whether it's TV or print, etc., face different challenges. I think recently there's an attempt being made by this Association of Director News and News Editors, perhaps at news channels, where professional journalists within TV channels are trying to band together at a higher level to try and sort of form some kind of new code of conduct that they can apply. Because what I think has happened is the dismantling of the institution of the professional journalist inside news channels in particular. Obviously, papers are not immune to that. And this that sort of channel owners are directly sort of guiding what comes on screen, what comes on air, what their main anchors can say, etc. So in terms of clawing back space, I think these little small attempts, they obviously will start small, are important. And I think sort of professional journalists are trying to think about these things. But it's a very difficult landscape, which is a very poisonous, toxic landscape already, where channels are at each other's throats. Of course, the enmities between owners goes back to a long time, you know, from the 1990s and 80s. You can mention a lot of those examples. But this sort of plethora of new TV channels that's emerged in Pakistan and the ownership behind it and their reasons and motives for getting into the industry has created a lot of problems for professional journalists within these things. And I think Talat might be able to speak about that more, but things like that, Association for Director News, and there are some ideas being percolating within the industry, but you know, it might take time.
Just to
Add to